Famous bandit Billy the Kid, whose true name was Henry McCarty, lived a hazardous life and fought for survival. His brief but adventurous voyage ended tragically in a quick gunfight for a reward at 21 years old. Billy the Kid's charm and bravado led to cattle rustling, gunfights, and near escapes. Numerous tales, films, and novels have memorialized him as a folk hero who personified the untamed American West. Even though his early death ended an era, his life continues to fascinate with fresh disclosures about his adventures. Join us as we explore Billy the Kid's myths, realities, and lasting legacy. When was Billy the Kid born? The exact date of Billy the Kid's birth is unknown. Although the year was undoubtedly 1859, the date of his birth date is September 17th in some sources, while November 23rd is mentioned in others. The author, Ash Upson, said that the date was November 23rd, yet Mr. Upson's birthday fell on the same day. It would be an incredible coincidence if Billy the Kid's birthday fell on November 23rd. The date is significant for historical accuracy's sake, and because he passed away at such a young age, every day counts greatly. A spokesman of St. Peter's Church in New York City asserts in another source that a baptism record is dated September 28th of the same year. Since baptisms were done about a week after delivery, it would indicate a birthday closer to September 17th. Where was Billy the Kid born? His birthplace is also a bit of a mystery. Most sources claim that he was born in New York City, although this may be a fabrication meant to provide more context to his enigmatic existence. It seems natural that Billy the Kid was an immigrant. Many arrived at Ellis Island in New York. More information is needed concerning Billy the Kid's birthplace in New York, assuming he was born there. Given the size of New York and the lack of clarity around his birthplace, his mythology is even more mysterious. He only remained in New York City briefly, that much is known. What's in a name? His most well-known moniker is Billy the Kid, but that is obviously a nickname. There were other names for him. Henry McCarty, or maybe McCartney, was his birth name. Since he rarely used his real name, nobody is certain. His mother, Catherine, and father, Patrick, were impoverished Irish immigrants who struggled in New York City's ghettos at a period when Protestant America did not see the Irish as white, and they were viewed as a hated minority. Shortly after Henry was born, his father, Patrick, passed away. Henry, Catherine, and Henry's younger brother, Joseph, moved west to Silver City, New Mexico, when Henry's mother, Catherine, remarried William Antrim. Henry began referring to himself as Kid Antrim after his stepfather. He enjoyed changing his name, but wasn't close to his stepfather. Bonnie Old William. Billy the Kid was left an orphan when his mother passed away in 1874 from consumption, now known as TB. He shifted to a life of crime in less than a year, and 2 years later, he changed his identity to William H. Bonney. In Irish, Bonnie means beautiful. Several reports have claimed that he spoke Irish fluently. Given that his parents were Irish, this was not shocking. He spoke with the locals or understood police enforcement to get himself out of a couple of tight situations using his fluency in Irish. William went by Billy for short, and he combined that moniker with the Kid from his previous alias, Kid Antrim, to become Billy the Kid, as he is most well known. He was young enough to merit that title. He was initially arrested before turning 17 years old, which marked the start of his notorious life of crime. He started small by stealing food. His stepfather abandoned him and his brother after the death of their mother. He was an orphan, and life was hard. Henry, as he was still called, moved into a boarding home owned and operated by Sarah Brown. The boarding home expelled him when he was discovered stealing food in September 1875. 10 days later, barely clinging to life, he broke into a Chinese-owned laundry and made off with some garments and 2 firearms. Henry's theft of laundry led to his imprisonment. Nonetheless, he managed to escape from custody in 2 days. This was the first of several jailbreaks he would carry out throughout his brief life. For the first time in his life, he was on the run and relished the opportunity. He fled west after escaping prison and eventually went to the Arizona Territory. He's an old ranch hand on the Rio Grande. He fled the authorities after committing a minor robbery, making his way to Arizona, where he began working as an itinerant shepherd and ranch worker on farms. Later in life, he would return to a ranch. This position helped him get employment as a teamster at Camp Grant Army Post, where he loaded and unloaded trains and stagecoaches. The young, gifted youngster grabbed the attention of Frank Cahill, a.k.a. Wendy, at Camp Grant. Big, hefty, older, and grumpy, Wendy saw that everyone in the camp adored little Henry. Maybe as a result, Cahill made it his mission in life to torment the young guy. Henry was the target of Cahill's vicious harassment until one day in 1877, it all came to a head. He commits his first murder by killing a bully. Henry played cards, most likely poker, at Camp Grant with a few other soldiers on that fateful day in 1877. While Wendy Cahill was playing, he was berating and mocking little Henry as usual. At last, he reached his breaking point. Henry shot back, calling Cahill a son of a bitch as soon as he labeled him a pimp. Cahill was even more enraged by the amusement of the other diners at the table. Cahill sprang over the table to trample on little Henry. Cahill, who was far larger than Henry, quickly overtook him and struck blows repeatedly to his head and torso. Henry drew his handgun and fired a direct shot at Cahill. Because Cahill had not pulled his weapon, Henry was accused of murdering Cahill unlawfully, even though it was evident that he was protecting himself. Despite one witness' testimony that Henry had no alternative but to fire to protect himself, murder charges were brought against Henry. Billy on trial. Billy the Kid was found guilty of Wendy Cahill's murder and given the death penalty. The judge was unconcerned that he had been representing himself. The rule was clear. The guilty party was the first person to draw a pistol. Later, U.S. laws about self-defense would alter. Currently, laws exist in several states permitting the use of lethal force by anybody who perceives a danger. However, Billy the Kid's trial judge gave him a hanging sentence. The child should be hung by the neck till dead, the judge said exactly. Billy only smiled and winked, urging the court to go to hell, when the judge asked if he had anything to say. Everyone laughed, except for the judge. The kid escaped prison and his destiny shortly after that, and he started traveling again. Escape to New Mexico. Henry ran away once again, this time to New Mexico, even though he was protecting himself. He changed his identity to William H. Bonney because he feared being discovered and put in jail. Because of his age and skinny look, people around him began calling him Billy the Kid, a nickname that stayed for the remainder of his brief life. The kid acquired fluency in Spanish while living in New Mexico, and historians speculate that he may have also spoken Irish as his parents were Irish immigrants and he was raised in an Irish area. According to legend, he even translated for the niece of a ranch owner who could only speak Irish. He did physical labor, worked on ranches, and rustled sheep and cattle. But before long, he would be embroiled in the Lincoln County War, an Old West conflict for territory and commercial rights. He liked and fostered his reputation as a gunslinger, which he acquired there. Billy the Kid in the house. Billy the Kid started working for John Tunstall in New Mexico in 1877. Originally from England, Tunstall moved to Lincoln County to start a ranch. Back then, in the Old West, land was cheap and abundant, and life was free and wild. He established a ranching company and employed several ranchmen. Billy the Kid was a ranch worker among them. Before long, Tunstall was embroiled in a war for dominance over a group of individuals who dominated all trade in the region, notably John Chisholm and James Dolan. In addition to running a dry goods store, the guys claimed ownership of the whole area. The House was the name of their store. The monopoly of the House was endangered when Tunstall founded a rival store to sell dry goods and cattle interests. He did so by providing excellent service and fair pricing. The Lincoln County War breaks out. The Jesse Evans Group, also known as the Boys, is an armed mercenary group organized by the House's owners and operators. Their stated purpose was to terrorize Tunstall and his enterprises. Due to Tunstall's honest and reasonable offers, more people came to him for business. As a result, the Jesse Evans gang was instructed to intimidate Tunstall and his staff. The gang caught up to Tunstall and friends on February 18, 1878. There were gunshots. Tunstall attempted to give up, realizing he was trapped, but the Jesse Evans gang had other plans. They shot him once in the back of the head and once in the chest, killing him in cold blood. In retaliation for Tunstall's death, Billy the Kid and a few other Tunstall workers established a gang they dubbed the Lincoln County Regulators. War and Revenge in the Old West. The 3-year Lincoln County War, which pitted the Evans gang against the Lincoln County Regulators, began with the assassination of John Tunstall and marked the start of New Mexico's journey toward statehood. The Regulators started their mission to exact revenge for Tunstall's death. They caught up to the Evans gang at the Blackwater Creek, where they executed all those involved in Tunstall's murder. The U.S. Army now became involved in the battle against the Regulators. When the Regulators withdrew to Lincoln, they found themselves encircled by the enemy. The Battle of Lincoln occurred over the next several days in July 1878, with both sides participating. Since the U.S. Army was not legally allowed to engage in direct combat with citizens, around 20 Regulators squared up against the same number of mercenaries fighting for the U.S. Army. Billy the Kid managed to get free once again once the Regulators were overthrown. The gunslinger Andrew Buckshot Roberts. The 47-year-old cowboy and criminal known as Buckshot Roberts had seen it all. He served as a hired gun for anybody who would pay him. It was the Jesse Evans gang in this instance. Among those responsible for John Tunstall's death was Roberts. After killing Sheriff William Brady, the Regulators were one day hiding out close to Blazer's Mills, and an arrest warrant had been issued for them. When they spotted Andrew Buckshot Roberts himself lurking about the yard, they were taken aback by their good fortune. They shot Roberts with a shotgun without hesitation, itching for retribution. Despite being able to fire at 3 Regulators, he ultimately passed away from his wounds. Paradoxically, a burst of buckshot to the abdomen killed Buckshot Roberts. Billy the Kid meets with Jesse James. A memorable anecdote about Billy the Kid is an encounter in a Las Vegas, New Mexico cafe. The name Las Vegas, which translates to the Meadows in Spanish, refers to a quiet frontier hamlet in New Mexico that was the ideal location for this covert gathering, unlike its well-known cousin in Nevada. The guy going by the name of Thomas Howard and Billy the Kid met. The pair got along well because they were both skilled marksmen and criminals who relished the attention and notoriety that came with their antics. The Kid declined Howard's invitation to go with his group, choosing to do it alone. What is Howard's true name? Jesse James. One can only speculate about the many adventures and intriguing crimes that might have occurred had the two bandits teamed together. The Kid was scarcely sinistral. The popular belief is that Billy the Kid was left-handed. The main source of this error was one of the few known photos of Billy the Kid during his lifetime. The iconic image shows the Kid standing with his single-action Colt pistol resting on his left hip and his Winchester rifle lying on the ground. The revolver's grip points backward, suggesting he pulled it with his hand on the same side. Because of this, researchers theorized that the Kid was left-handed. But ferrotype photography was in use back then. This method of photography, also called tintype, used an iron plate that was exposed to light. The picture would be inverted, displaying what would have shown in a mirror rather than what someone standing across from you would view. It is now recognized that the picture is upside down and that Billy the Kid was, in fact, right-handed. So clever, he forced his opponents to shoot blanks. In contrast to many of the gunslingers and outlaws of the day, Billy the Kid was well known for being cheerful and kind. However, if prodded, he would undoubtedly defend himself. He sometimes used cunning to prevail in fights. He was partying with his friends at a New Mexico tavern one evening in January 1880. Joe Grant, a guy working at the pub, was making fun of himself and harassing and taunting customers. The kid anticipated difficulties. The kid approached Grant and complimented him on the rifle he was carrying. He requested to hold it, and in the process, he secretly rotated the chamber and left it empty for the subsequent shot. Grant pressed the trigger on his pistol and aimed it toward the kid when the gun broke out later. The kid killed Grant with a single, innocuous gunshot. Shootout at the Great House Ranch. Billy the Kid and a few others had just stolen some cattle in November 1880, and they were escaping a posse under the command of Deputy James Carlisle. The Kid's pal, Whiskey Jim Greathouse's ranch, was where the rustlers went to wait it out. Carlisle and his posse received the call for the Kid and his rustlers to surrender, with howls of laughter from inside the house. Then the rustlers proposed that they send Greathouse out as a counter-hostage and send Carlisle in to work out arrangements. Carlisle stepped into the home. However, he believed Greathouse had already been slain and that he would be the next to go when he heard a gunshot outside. In an attempt to flee, he rushed toward the window when the rustlers fatally shot him. The Kid and his companions managed to flee when the posse withdrew during a confrontation. Greathouse escaped uninjured. Sheriff Pat Garrett is elected. In Lincoln County, New Mexico, Sheriff George Kimball was legitimately elected to serve as law enforcement official. Nevertheless, Pat Garrett defeated the sitting sheriff on November 2, 1880. Pat Garrett won with 320 votes to 179 votes. Although Garrett's tenure officially started in January 1881, Sheriff Kimball appointed him a deputy sheriff shortly after the election. Additionally, Garrett was deputized as a U.S. sheriff, enabling him to pursue criminals beyond county boundaries. In the end, Pat Garrett takes the short life of Billy the Kid. His primary claim to fame was that. He even penned a book on Billy the Kid's life, which was accepted as the canonical historical narrative for a long time. But recently, academics have started to doubt the objectivity of this kind of source. It's safe to say that Sheriff Garrett was not entirely objective in this situation. He took it in trade. Following the Lincoln County War, the Kid returned on the run. He chose to visit John Chisholm, a rich rancher who was one of the Regulators' supporters since he was short on funds. The Kid wanted to get the $500, and Chisholm had been the one who had recruited him to fight for the Regulators. Chisholm declined to pay, saying he had already reimbursed the Kid and the Lincoln County Regulators for the supplies and money they had received from him during the conflict. Chisholm and Billy the Kid didn't quarrel. He led his soldiers outside to inspect Chisholm's herd of cattle. As he departed the property, he gladly grabbed $500 worth of cattle he had chosen to be very nice-looking. Eventually, Pat Garrett was persuaded by John Chisholm and James Dolan to run for Lincoln County Sheriff to make a determined effort to capture Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid turns to a life of crime. Billy the Kid avoided thieving until the conclusion of the Lincoln County War. Some claim that the Kid irreversibly went to a life of crime after Chisholm refused to pay him. Billy believed that Chisholm had recruited him to fight with the Regulators and would reimburse him after the conflict. Even though the Kid had been employed by John Tunstall, he might have just left. Nevertheless, Chisholm gave him a job since he needed the money. Billy would have been okay if Chisholm had paid him, according to Anastasio Trujillo, who knew both of them. Billy the Kid turned to a life of crime after the war, beginning with Chisholm's cattle, resulting from this insult and the following destitution. Still, he always thought he was in the right. He represented a danger to the wealthy and powerful's whole way of life. Out with the old sheriff, in with the new sheriff. Billy the Kid and Pat Garrett knew one another rather well. They were longtime buddies who enjoyed drinking and playing cards together. However, Garrett's aspirations interfered with all of that. Though they knew they wouldn't be able to defeat Billy the Kid in a fair firefight, John Chisholm and James Dolan were nonetheless out to exact retribution. They realized they had no chance of defeating him. They had no choice except to pursue Old West justice if they wanted him. Initially, they attempted to persuade George Kimball, the sheriff in office then, to pursue Billy the Kid and take him into custody for his offenses. However, Kimball had no desire to follow the orders of a few wealthy ranchers. He felt sympathetic to Billy the Kid and appreciated his fair-mindedness and the fact that he was a self-made guy from poverty and an orphan. With that, the two guys looked at Pat Garrett. They once were friends, then they became enemies. Pat Garrett was contacted by Chisholm and Dolan with a proposition. They were aware that Garrett wanted to become the sheriff of Lincoln County. There was a catch. They said they could assist him in winning the sheriff's race. Pat Garrett was required to swear while running for office that he would track down and capture Billy the Kid, dead or alive. Pat Garrett gave the suggestion serious thought. He was a longtime friend and drinking and poker partner of Billy the Kid, but the allure of the office won him over, so he gave in. After Garrett emerged victorious in November, he searched for Billy the Kid. He assured Billy that he wouldn't follow him if he fled and moved to another state. But Garrett would find him and take him in if he remained in New Mexico, any place in New Mexico. The pursuit for the Kid begins. After the election, Garrett got up a gang and set out to find Billy the Kid. He received a report that the Kid was in San Miguel County, New Mexico, at the Detrick Ranch near Bosque Grande. He assaulted the place on November 30th, 1880. Although he did not discover Billy the Kid there, he did come upon two guys who were being held on suspicion of murder and horse theft. He apprehended them and sent them over to the San Miguel County Sheriff. Garrett then traveled to Puerto de Luna, a town in Guadalupe County, to search for Billy the Kid. Even though he didn't discover the Kid there, he continued to scour the town for criminals on patrol. Mariano Oliva, a fierce local, fought with the foreigner because he felt he was spying on his village. Ultimately, Garrett fired a shot into Oliva's shoulder, then departed to Puerto de Luna to resume his hunt for Billy the Kid. New Mexico's Fort Sumner. In New Mexico, there was a settlement called Fort Sumner and a military barracks close to Bosque Redondo. Native Americans who were taken prisoner by U.S. soldiers on their endless march west to seize control of all North America were interned there for years. It comprised the main fort building, an outside wall, and several dispersed residences, barracks, and other structures. It was one of Billy the Kid's favorite places to stop. Fort Sumner was abandoned in 1869 because it was deemed unnecessary. Along with Ted Turner, who formed CNN and TBS and purchased up as much ranch land in the western U.S. as he could, the property and structures were sold to rancher and cattle baron Lucian Maxwell, among the greatest landholders in U.S. history. Approximately 100 years before, Maxwell bought as much ranch property as possible, culminating in acquiring over 1.7 million acres, including Fort Sumner. He made several building renovations there. First encounter at Fort Sumner. Billy the Kid and a handful of his crew, including Charlie Beaudry, Tom Pickett, Billy Wilson, and Tom O'Phalliard, arrived at Fort Sumner on December 19, 1880. The Kid loved to stay there while traveling through the region, and Deputy Garrett knew this even though his tenure as sheriff wouldn't start for many weeks. To wait for Billy the Kid, Garrett and his crew rode ahead and hid close to the fort. Garrett spotted O'Phalliard riding in with Billy the Kid's crew and thought he was Billy. He gave his soldiers the command to begin fire without giving any prior notice, and they killed O'Phalliard. The Kid was caught off guard, not anticipating Garrett's presence. With a swift turn of their horses, Billy the Kid and his companions rode out as rapidly as possible. They managed to get away from Garrett, for now. Part 1 of the Shootout at Stinking Springs. Pat Garrett led his group eastward out of Fort Sumner 4 days later on December 23rd. At midnight, 13 of them headed out through the heavy snow. Garrett had obtained a description of the group and Billy the Kid's attire before departing. Witnesses specifically mentioned the Kid's headgear, a green, hat-banded Mexican sugar loaf. 10 miles later, Garrett and his crew arrived at the Brazil Wilcox Ranch, where they had been informed the gang was going. From there, Garrett could see the group's snow-covered route rather plainly. He deduced that Billy the Kid and company were making their way to Stinking Springs, a little community that sprang up around the healing sulfur hot springs that naturally surfaced there after spending some time tracing the hoof prints in the snow. They decided what to do next after following the route to a little rock house in the town. Part 2 of the Shootout at Stinking Springs. Garrett intended to enter the residence and surprise the group, who most likely were unaware they were being followed. However, the rest of his group decided to wait it out, so they cuddled close together over the long, chilly night. One deputy even had frostbite on his foot due to the extreme cold. They kept a close eye out in the morning for any indication of activity. Garrett watched closely for the kid's green hat-banded sugarloaf hat. To compel Billy the Kid and the rest of his gang to give up, Garrett hoped to kill Billy the Kid right away. He ordered the other members of his posse to start fire because he was signaling Billy the Kid's approach with his pistol poised and ready to fire. The hours passed slowly until the sun began to rise and they became aware of the sounds inside the home. Charlie Beaudry's Stinking Springs Shootout. On Christmas Eve, 1880, when the sun rose, Pat Garrett and his posse of lawmen stood guard outside the Little Rock cottage where Billy the Kid and his gang had spent the previous evening. Soon after, a guy with horse feed sacks entered the doorway. Garrett could make out the man's green-banded Mexican hat, but not his face. Garrett made no hesitation. Garrett pulled the trigger, raising his Winchester rifle to his shoulder. The other members of the posse immediately lifted their weapons and opened fire on the lone cowboy. They had murdered Billy the Kid's comrade, Charlie Beaudry, a cowboy who had run away from his family's Mississippi property to become a vagrant. Stumbling back into the hut was Beaudry. Billy the Kid said to Beaudry, "Charlie, you can get revenge even though they killed you. Take out a few of the sons of bitches before you pass away." Stinking Springs Shootout. Attrition and Surrender. Billy the Kid and his group were disheartened, but unflinching after the death of their buddy Charlie Beaudry. Initially, they attempted to bring their horses inside, hoping to make a swift and unexpected escape and maybe escape their captors. Pat Garrett killed one of the horses by aiming his Winchester rifle through the sights. The equine gave way at the entrance. After that, Garrett fired the ropes, securing and releasing several additional horses. The equine strayed away. The group succeeded only in bringing 2 horses inside. The kid considered running away even yet. Billy the Kid knew he wouldn't have been able to get out fast enough to evade Garrett's gun, but since the horse Garrett had slain, he was in the path of the entrance. Billy the Kid concluded that there was no way out of the Stinking Springs ranch home. Billy the Kid's Trial. At Stinking Springs, Billy the Kid handed himself into Sheriff Pat Garrett after receiving a guarantee from Garrett that he wouldn't murder him. On December 27, 1880, Garrett brought Billy the Kid to the courtroom of Santa Fe, New Mexico. It was more than a year before he got his $500 reward. Billy the Kid attempted to flee, of course. He began breaking out of the Santa Fe prison by burrowing, but he was discovered. After that, he was sent to a more secure prison in Mesilla, New Mexico. After that, he was sent to Lincoln to face trial for the Lincoln County war murder of Sheriff William Brady. Judge Warren Bristol was in charge of the trial. Billy the Kid was found guilty of murder and given the death penalty after a brief trial. However, he managed a daring escape from prison and avoided being executed by hanging. The kid breaks out of jail and flees. Billy the Kid pulled off a spectacular escape from prison and his execution sentence on April 28, 1881. Billy the Kid had to use the restroom while wearing handcuffs and leg shackles to go to the outhouse. He was able to get out of his shackles while inside. Then, disarming James Bell, the guard, he ambushed and overwhelmed him. He used his shotgun to shoot Bell. Sheriff Garrett's deputy, Bob Ollinger, was the second guard watching Billy the Kid. Billy was eager to get vengeance on Ollinger since it was he who had murdered Charlie Beaudry, the kid's companion, during the gunfight at Stinking Springs. Ollinger believed Bell had shot Billy the Kid after hearing the gunfire that killed Bell. As he dashed to the outhouse structure, Billy the Kid appeared out of nowhere. He said, "Hello, Bob," with a smile, before letting Ollinger have it. Heading back to Fort Sumner for the last battle. Billy the Kid removed his leg shackles by using a pickaxe on them. He fled after stealing a horse from outside the prison. Where should I go, though? Even though he could avoid Garrett until July, he was certain that Garrett would never give up on him. He decided to make his last stand there because he was at ease and had supporters at Fort Sumner. He withdrew to the fort to consider his options. In July 1881, Billy the Kid drank at Fort Sumner with a buddy called Jesus Silva. I asked Billy why he kept returning to Fort Sumner. Silva recounted afterward. "Don't you know that you're going to die?" I said. And he said, "Yeah, I know I'm going to be killed, and I know Pat Garrett is going to do it." Ambush at Fort Sumner. Billy the Kid was determined to get vengeance on Garrett and his erstwhile allies who had turned against him, even though he knew Garrett would ultimately find him at Fort Sumner. When Garrett arrives at the fort in July, he talks to Pete Maxwell without realizing Billy the Kid is holed up within. Billy's old buddy Pete was at the fort at the moment. Garrett spent a few hours discussing Billy the Kid's whereabouts with Maxwell after going inside his home at the fort, and Maxwell had no idea that Billy the Kid lived a few homes away. Billy became hungry as the Kid and Silva continued their conversation. "Does Silva have any new meat?" he asked. "No, but I killed a calf for Pete Maxwell today," Silva said to him. The Kid had an idea. The Kid's death. Billy the Kid told Jesus Silva, "I'll just go over and make old Pete give me some of that," after learning that his buddy Pete Maxwell had fresh beef. Billy then made his way to Maxwell's residence. Pat Garrett was sitting on Pete Maxwell's bed. Pete had been speaking with Garrett, but kept Billy the Kid a secret. Maxwell was unaware that Billy was on his way, but Garrett was. Billy the Kid went through the doors of Maxwell's home and started to move about. He saw a person sitting on the bed in the dark as soon as he entered Maxwell's bedroom. Billy asked in Spanish, "¿Quién es?" meaning, "Who's that?" Upon hearing his voice, Garrett reached for his .44 caliber Winchester and shot. The bullet struck him in the chest. Pat Garrett, the Kid's longtime buddy, had killed him. Nobody understands Garrett's betrayal of the Kid. Some claim it was only done for the cash incentive. Hiding away and picking battles. Jesus Silva, a companion of Billy the Kid, had further anecdotes about the well-known gunman. The Kid was hiding out after the Lincoln County War when he was sought for Sheriff William Brady's murder. Silva claimed to have assisted the Kid in walking 8 miles south of Fort Sumner to Jesus Anaya's house. He took refuge among Anaya's 3 daughters there. According to Silva, when guests visited, Billy would dress as a female and hang around in the kitchen with the Anaya girls. Billy the Kid went on after collecting his strength at the Anaya house because he didn't want to jeopardize the family that had assisted him. He also made an excellent one since he was short, had long hair, and spoke Mexican just as well as them. Despite his many encounters with unfortunate situations, Billy the Kid was a kind young man. A fightin' and a dancin'. Silva also said that the Kid had a passion for dancing. Silva said he was a good dancer and always went to dances. A local called Pormosino Garcia once wanted to take his children home after a dance, so the Kid got into a fight with him. "No, you won't, because if the girls go, the dance will bust up," Billy said as he blocked the door. The aged, weathered guy, who had no idea who the Kid was, challenged him to a duel. The noble Billy removed his pistol, and the 2 guys got into a fist fight. The old man gave him a good licking, Silva remembers. Billy offered Garcia a sardonic look after the battle, wiping blood from the corner of his lips. After giving Garcia a firm handshake, the Kid said, "You're just a better man than me." Cheers to Hollywood. Many movies have depicted the life of Billy the Kid, but the actor portraying the titular character has always been much too old for the position. Billy the Kid passed away at the age of 21. Val Kilmer played a 30-something man in the film Billy the Kid. Paul Newman played a 33-year-old in The Left-Handed Gun. Because a tintype picture reverses its appearance, the movie also helped to spread the myth that the Kid was left-handed. At the time of his portrayal as Billy in the movie Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, actor Chris Christopherson was 37 years old. Even when he portrayed the youthful gunman in Youthful Guns, Emilio Estevez, Charlie Sheen's brother and Martin Sheen's son, was only 26 years old. He also gave Billy a harsher and more violent portrayal in the film than he had. A seldom seen photo of the ex-friends. One of the few documented images of Billy the Kid is his croquet game with Pat Garrett. That was the lone example, together with the ancient tintype picture. Well, until 2015. A picture hung on the wall of a modestly decorated room leased out on Airbnb at a property in North Carolina. The picture should have been more considered. However, Frank Abrams, the owner, started to worry that the photo could be more unusual than he had previously believed. Following a professional consultation, it was concluded that this was a picture of Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid together before Garrett's appointment as sheriff and their eventual fallout. Billy the Kid is the one second from the left, while Garrett is the man furthest to the right. I would have charged more for the room if I had known it was one of the most famous photos in history, Mr. Abrams jokingly said. Would you please get up, real Billy? In June 2003, the mayors of Capitan, New Mexico, proposed that Billy the Kid's body be exhumed to compare the DNA with that of Roberts and Miller. However, local sheriffs opposed the idea, citing Billy the Kid's gravesite as a popular tourist attraction and fearing what would happen if they discovered that Billy the Kid was not buried there. In 1950, Brushy Bill Roberts from Texas claimed to be the real Billy the Kid, and that an imposter had been killed in his place. Despite this, Brushy Bill died before any DNA tests could be done to confirm his claims. An outlaw worth remembering. Though he passed away at age 21, Billy the Kid, a.k.a. William H. Bonney, a.k.a. Henry McCarty, a.k.a. Kid Antrim, achieved immortality through the legend of his remarkable story. As a bright, gregarious orphan who got caught up in the circumstances and accepted his fate with grace and dignity, he can inspire many. Billy the Kid has touched the lives of Americans since he became famous during his lifetime. Famous in his day, he's been the subject of over 50 movies and television shows in the U.S. and portrayed by many of the best actors of their generations. The first portrayal was in the 1911 silent movie Billy the Kid, only 30 years after his death.
If you've watched the video till here, that means you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe. Don't forget to turn on the notifications bell icon